We are back. This is another in the series, in the saga of metalcore videos. Today we're talking about 2000s Raw Metalcore, one of my favorites. So, yo, what's up, guys?
Welcome to Tune Fever, baby.
Hey, so metalcore. This is the part 3 of the saga, the 2000s Raw stuff like I talked about in the intro. Next, we have the 2000s Raw Metalcore distinctives. So first of all, the recordings are not as clean as the other half of 2000s metalcore, which is the more polished stuff, which is probably kind of the most obvious thing to note about it. And it's not only that the recordings aren't as clean, but a lot of the playing is distinctively less like precise or Guitar Hero-y. And so there is that to it as well. So number 2, they're finding different ways to add dissonance to their sound, and sometimes it is a bit bizarre. And dissonance, that can be basically anything that makes it sound uglier or more brutal. So over here in figure 1B, you have a tritone, which is known for being dissonant, to answer the gentleman's question here. But they can add dissonance as well with like rhythmic stuff that's like really confusing or strange, or abrupt time signature changes, or and some of this stuff, it doesn't really, parts of songs or whole songs, sometimes they don't really rely on a time signature. The song is kind of just built around lyrics, and so time signature just isn't really part of what it is. And so there are some various ways to add dissonance, and of course there's different kinds of screaming and singing certain notes over certain chords in the guitar. But yeah, and then of course you'll get the occasional laser sound here and there, and so yeah, sometimes it gets a little bizarre. But yeah, number 3, distinctively ugly. So like we said, they're not as clean, but it kind of is like I don't know, they're like growing mold or something. Like they're kind of very rustic, or yeah, like they have kind of a grit that maybe the clean stuff doesn't necessarily have as much. It's kind of like if you could compare it to something, it would be like if you have a really good tool that's really easy to work with, and then you have another tool that like can get the job done, but you have to work a lot harder with it. It's kind of like that. It's like maybe they're playing guitars that aren't tuned very well, and they're trying to make the heaviest music they possibly can and stuff like that. There's just kind of some weird and ugly stuff to it, but it's really good. And so the next one on the list that I have here is it's a good bit less hardcore sounding than the 90s metalcore. Yeah, we're moving in a more metal direction where everything is more so motivated by metal than hardcore, but we're still coming off the influence of a lot of those 90s metalcore bands. And then the last one on the list is it's pretty no BS like the 90s metalcore bands. And I guess what I exactly mean by that is that with the 2000s polished metalcore stuff, there's a lot of like production value and shimmer and shine to a lot of the things that they do, and kind of some theatrics, sometimes some grandiosity, and that's not really here. It's very in your face, and this is what this is, like it or not. So here we go with my picks for this subgenre of metal, which is 2000s raw metalcore. So remember, the reason that I choose these is because I want to give you kind of the sound of this subgenre of metal. I want to put that sound in your ear. That way you can kind of learn more about it. And I think that my recommendations will really help with something like that if you're exploring metal. So I do 2 classics, 2 favorites, 2 interesting, that are just interesting for some reason. But let's get started. First, we have Norma Jean, their album Bless the Martyr, Kiss the Child. This one, okay, the cover, yeah, let's not talk about the cover. It's pretty ugly, I understand. I suppose it kind of sounds like the album. Some things to note about this one that I think make it a classic. It was particularly influential in how it approached music. There's not a whole lot traditional about this, but there's a whole lot that really rocks about this. Um, you know, this is one of them that feels like the songs were designed around lyrics. Um, and sometimes they can sound a bit random and chaotic. And a lot of times, whenever you're listening to this album, there's not gonna be like you'll go entire songs where there's no like structure. It's just part, and it seems random. Um, there's a lot of art to this album. There's a lot of art to it. Lyrics, Josh Scogin and probably some other members of Nora Jean at that time definitely helped write lyrics. But yeah, of course, Josh Scogin probably wrote a lot of this. And I'm a big Josh Scogin fan. The stuff that he does, I'm a really big fan of. And he is the singer here. That's that album. Please check that out. Okay. Album number 2, Converge, with their album Jane Doe. This is not actually my favorite Converge album, but this one is much more of a classic than my personal favorite. This one in particular, it's got a real punk edge to it. Also, the singer I find kind of unappealing, but also I like it. I don't know. It's interesting because I like it sometimes, and sometimes it's like, why would he sing like that or scream like that or whatever? Yeah, it's quite the album. It's definitely a classic. It definitely was super duper influential in terms of how brutal and how nasty you can be in metal. And but yeah, another one where there's just some real art to it and very, very influential. You know, I used to not really like Converge very much. But you know, I found some stuff by Converge that I really like, and once I heard that stuff, I kind of went back to Jane Doe, and I do actually really like it, and I actually own it now, and I like to jam it sometimes. I mean, it's a good album, but it is absolutely a classic. So I think it's one that you should get into if you're going to get into 2000s raw metalcore, which is a term that I invented, but still I think it's a good term. Let's get into my favorites. First of all, we have an album called Jasmine's Lullaby. 7 Angels, 7 Plagues is the band. Jasmine is spelled like one of those like 2020 names that millennials are naming their children. It's a terrible spelling. Holy cow. But this album, I think that it's very artful in its approach. It's some of the heaviest stuff that you'll hear, and also it's some of the most beautiful stuff that you'll hear. They're really just going for honest, really good music. The screaming is like the best, and the playing, it's like really top notch. I mean, this is a really tight, passionate, and I think they're also pretty young guys. And I'm only aware of this album by them. I'm aware of like an EP actually with like 5 songs on it, but it's got some stuff this has too. Yes, and this album is terrific. So absolutely hear it. Next we have an album called Art Damage by the band Fear Before the March of Flames. This one is not the heaviest that you'll hear, but it is very, very kind of experimenty, and you know it's got some wackiness really. But a lot of the ideas here, this is kind of like earlier I was talking about how sometimes it gets a little bizarre. It definitely gets bizarre here. I mean, it's called Art Damage. What do you expect? It's quite something. You know, I love it. But it can be wacky, but I love it. So next we're going to talk about the interesting stuff. Every Time I Die, Gutter Phenomenon. Every Time I Die does not have a bad album. They make great music every album they put out. This one is a classic, and they probably have some other classics, but most people know this album, at least. Every Time I Die, Gutter Phenomenon. Something that I think whenever I listen to this is that it's very rock and roll. When I hear it, I'm thinking like, wow, like this is just a rock and roll record. Um, yeah, definitely a little less heavy than some of the other stuff on the list. Um, but it's absolutely metalcore whenever you think about the distinctives and stuff. It definitely fits here, and it was also part of the scene of metalcore, and I suppose they still are. Yeah. So next, well, this is the last one. This is a band called 18 Visions. This is their album from 2000. So this is the very uh, earliest one on this list. It's called Until the Ink Runs Out. Guys, this album, it doesn't sound like it's from 2000 to me. It really doesn't sound like that. I mean, and it's interesting because later this band kind of added elements of hard rock into their sound and they kind of took on that lane of music. But here in their really earlier stuff, I mean, I think this might be their first album. I think it is. Um, yeah, I don't know their discography as well as other bands, but this one I do believe is their first. Um, wow, it's so heavy. I mean, especially compared to some newer stuff that they've done. But yeah, it's called Until the Ink Runs Out. I was just listening to this particular one today. Gotta say, I do fully recommend. So these are the six. Of course, I could recommend others, but yeah, those are listed here in sources cited. Up next in the what will be the last installment of the metalcore saga will be the 2010s. So we're gonna get into what makes 2010 metalcore kind of, well, the 2010s, the teens or however you say it. What makes them or their metalcore from their time unique or special or interesting. But that's the video. See you guys.